The other day, I had an interesting discussion on one of my social media posts, and one of the comments on that post said that all good teachers yell or raise their voice at their students. The discussion that followed in the comments was interesting. So, some teachers agreed with this person, while others flat out disagreed. Well, today I'm going to be diving into my personal thoughts on whether good teachers yell and how you can get your students to pay attention without yelling. So, before we dive into that, let me know in the comments. Do you agree with yelling as a teacher? Let me know or send me a DM. I would love to chat. All right, so let's first talk about my story when it comes to raising your voice in the classroom. So, when I first started teaching, I was told that good teachers are strict and mean and don't smile until December. That first year, I yelled. I raised my voice at my students because that was what I was told good teachers do. I didn't feel great about it, and I hated how it made me feel. And I hate how it made my students feel. When I was growing up, I was that student who would immediately cry whenever someone raised their voice at me, so I was very sensitive, and I felt like I wasn't really honoring that part of me. And when I look back at my mentor teachers, a lot of them would raise their voice too. And so I really had this idea that in order to be a good teacher, you had to raise your voice and you had to yell. Well, the second year of teaching, I decided to find a different way. Throughout the years, I found ways to get students to follow directions without yelling. So let's talk about how. So, in summary, I don't think you necessarily have to raise your voice to be a good teacher. I'm not shaming anyone who does, but it just doesn't work well for me. So, let's talk about different ways you can get your students to follow directions or to pay attention to you without raising your voice. So, the first strategy is to set clear expectations. So, when I first taught, I thought I had a really hard class my first year of teaching. I was teaching kindergarten. I had done my mentorship in kindergarten, and the pre K teachers even came up to me before summer started and said, "Hey, sorry about this group. We tried their best." So I just knew that, okay, this is going to be a challenging class. But as I look back now, I realize that was actually a really good class. And the reality is, I just didn't really have clear expectations. Not that I hate myself for that or have any sort of feelings about that. It's just I didn't know better. And when we know better, we do better. But I didn't have clear expectations back then. I thought I did. I thought I was doing everything right, or everything that the other teachers had told me was right. But the reality was, I didn't have clear expectations. So let's talk about how to have clear expectations in class. So the first thing is to explicitly teach your classroom expectations like you would your content. There was this huge disconnect. I would tell my students to get in line, and they would push in their chair, run around the classroom, roll on the carpet, play with their friend's hair, talk really loudly as they would get in line, and I would get so frustrated that my students wouldn't get in line the right way, and I would have them do it again and then again and again and again, and I'd feel like I had to tell them a million times to get in line, level 0, yada yada yada. But the reality was, I was telling my students the expectations, I wasn't actually teaching them the expectations. I'm going to say that again because it's really important. I was telling my students the expectations. I wasn't teaching them the expectations. As good teachers, we know that in order to teach someone something, you have to do more than just tell them. You have to model it. You can do the release model, which is I do, we do, you do. And I wasn't doing any of that when it came to my classroom management. So when I applied that to my expectations, everything changed. I explicitly teach my expectations in my classroom management like I would content. So this is what it kind of looks like. It looks like me modeling. I physically get up and model. All right, boys and girls, today I'm gonna model. We're gonna talk about what it should look like and sound like to get in line. I physically get up and I model what it should look like for a student to get up and get in line. And then we have a discussion. Hey, what did that look like and sound like? You're right, I had walking feet. You're right, blah, 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 blah. I had my hands to myself. I was facing forward, bubble in my mouth. Now I'm going to model to you the wrong way to do it. So then I'm going to get up again and I'm going to run around the classroom. I'm going to push over a chair. I'm going to, talk to the person in front of me. I'm going to play with that person's hair. And then we're going to discuss, hey, what should this expectation not look like and sound like? And then we're going to discuss why it's important. I see so many people miss this step. I was a white kid growing up. I wanted to know why things worked, not to be mean, not to be that annoying kid with a million questions, but because I knew if I knew how things worked and why, I could then remember it and apply it to other things. So we discussed why it's important to do it the right way versus the wrong way, and then the you do part, we practice over and over until it becomes a habit. When I finally looked at my classroom management through the lens of teaching content and actually teaching instead of telling, everything changed for me. So having clear expectations in class and actually teaching the expectations in class versus telling is a huge thing that's going to help your students follow expectations in class versus having to constantly raise your voice to get them to listen to you. Again, I was that teacher. I'm not shaming anyone. I was that teacher that would get so frustrated because I would tell my kids 10, 20 times in a row to get in line and they wouldn't. I get so frustrated. And now that I know better, we know better, we do better, that I wasn't modeling to them. I wasn't teaching them. I was just telling and expecting them to read my mind. So by modeling and having that, it made it a lot easier. If you kind of want inspiration, you kind of want to see, first off, a huge list of all the expectations and classroom procedures I cover in my class, but also you want to see what this can visually look like, make sure to check out my classroom procedure slides in my TPT store. Inside the description, I have a list of over 40 different expectations I cover in class, and you can actually look at the slides. I'm not saying you have to purchase them, but even if you just want inspiration on what this can look like, definitely go check those out to spark some ideas and inspiration on how you can start incorporating this into your classroom. All right, second thing that'll help you from having to raise your voice in class to get your students to follow expectations is to have consistent consequences. Now, it's easy for a class to get out of hand when there's no consequences for not following directions. I'm going to call myself out on this one. When I was a first-year teacher, a lot of my mentor teachers, a lot of the teachers I looked up to, a lot of the teachers who had shown me what it was to be a teacher would take away recess. They'd say, hey, stop talking, or you're taking away recess. Hey, stop talking, or you're gonna owe me your recess. Hey, stop talking, stop talking, stop talking, and then they would eventually take their recess away. So I naturally would give my students 10, 20 warnings, or I did have teachers who would immediately take recess away. I didn't feel right by doing that, and so I'd give them a ton of warnings because I didn't want to feel like a bad teacher or a mean teacher. And then my students then learned subconsciously, hey, she's not serious. I can do it 4 or 5 times before she's actually serious, so I'm going to keep doing it. I like to think of consequences and boundaries in the classroom as like a fence. Kids naturally love to know where the boundaries are. So if you go play outside and you say, hey, you play inside the fence, they're not so worried about where the boundary is, most of them. Whereas if you throw them into a field and say, go play, they're gonna keep testing where your boundaries are or where the end of the line that they're available or able to play in. Same thing with your consequences. So it's also easy to lose power and get into power struggles in the classroom when you don't have consistent consequences and you're constantly giving out warnings but no follow through. So how do you give consistent consequences without being the mean teacher raising your voice? Well, come up with how you're going to respond each time someone doesn't follow expectations. So I'm going to give you an example, a walkthrough of how I personally respond to disruptive behavior in the classroom and what I do each time. I don't do 10 warnings at step 1, 10 warnings at step 2, 10 warnings at step 3. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, done. Okay, so here's just an example of what this could look like. The first time, let's say the disruptive behavior, 2 students are talking to each other while I'm teaching. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to teach while I'm walking around the room, and I'm just naturally going to stand closer to these students, not to be in an intimidating in their bubble way, but just in a, hey, just a reminder, this is the expectations, I'm talking, we should probably, but you're not saying that. You're just using your body language to naturally remind them on what they're supposed to be doing right now. Let's say they continue to talk with their partner or the person next to them. I'm going to shout out 3 students who are following the expectation and what they are doing specifically that I like. So if I'm teaching a math lesson, I love how student X has their feet flat on the floor and their hands at their desk. I love how student B has their eyes on me and their listening ears and they're tracking the speaker, so I know they're actively listening to me. I love how student 3, obviously insert their name here, has their voice at a level 0, so I know that they're thinking about what I have to say. So I'm pointing out 3 students who are following specifically the expectations, what that original student isn't, or 2 students aren't doing right now. So I'm giving them opportunities, hey, here are the 3, because whatever you focus on, you create more of. So if you're like, this person's doing what you're supposed to be doing, this person's doing what you're supposed to be doing, this person's what you're supposed to be doing. Most kids love attention, and what you bring more attention to, you create more of. So if I'm calling out negative behavior, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, you might have 4 or 5 kids then that do negative behavior because the first kid got attention for it, or disruptive behavior. If I then start pointing out all the positive, what's going to happen? More kids are going to sit up straight and follow the expectations in class because they've learned that you get praise or positive reinforcement for the expected behavior, right? So that's the second thing. The third thing is, okay, I finished my lesson and these 2 were talking the entire time. I release my students to do a practice problem or something, and I'm like, could I please have student X, student Y come meet me outside for a conversation? Or I'll just pull them one at a time. Can I please have student X for a sideline conversation? That's step 3. So we have a sideline conversation. Here's what I'm noticing. Here are the expectations in class. What's going on? Why aren't you following the expectations? What can we do next time? If you continue, here's the next step. Simple. 4th time. Again, I'm not giving 20 warnings between all these. These are my step by step by step. 4th time, I'm going to have them practice the expectation. Let's say we go and we're doing the practice and they're still fooling around. Later that day, I'm going to say, hey, since you had a hard time, following the expectations during independent work, while the class is doing X, you're going to be practicing the expectation by practicing what it should look like in sunlight to do your work or sit quietly while someone's talking or teaching or etc. We're going to practice the expectation. 5th time is family contact or behavior plan. At that point, then we need to create a team and a plan to keep that student on track and to get them to follow the expectations in class. So that's just an example, but notice how I don't have 20 or 30 consequences, warnings in between. It is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, done. I'm not giving them 10, 20 warnings. And I picked things strategically that I feel aligned with. I don't feel guilty about pulling my kids for a sideline conversation. I don't feel guilty about pointing out 3 students who are doing what they're supposed to. Making sure that your steps are aligned with you, making sure you pick consequences that are aligned with you is really important here. The next strategy you can use instead of raising your voice to get your students to follow expectations is to have an intentional voice level. So a great example of this is my first year of teaching. I had a teacher's assistant who would yell at the kids in the classroom. She would raise her voice whenever they weren't following expectations. Here's what I noticed. The more she yelled, the louder the class got. The more she yelled, the louder the class got. The more she yelled, the louder the class got, until eventually everybody was teaching over me. I naturally seemed to have more of a soft-spoken voice. So then I ended up, having a conversation, and I started lowering the voice and the expectations in class and having a reset. Another example of this is a couple years ago, I was in one of my friend's classrooms while she was doing Valentine's Day, and her class started getting loud. They're super excited for the Valentine's Day party. So she was helping get her classroom running to the different stages of Valentine's Day. If you are a primary teacher, you understand the chaos. And I was distracting the students and keeping them engaged and calm while she was doing that. So I started whispering. I brought my voice level down, and her kids were up here. But after I started whispering and bringing my energy down here, the kids were leaning in, and the class met me where I was. They weren't up here talking over me, they were down here because they wanted to hear what I had to say. And so being intentional with your voice can be really important, because if the students are super loud and you have a really good rapport with them and the relationships, you can get quiet. And your students will meet you there if you have that respect built in and those relationships built. Whisper days were amazing for me. So I'm outing myself, and I do have, which is crazy to say, prior students watching this, so they're gonna learn my secret. But I would lose my voice throughout the year, certain times a year when I noticed the class was up here, and we would have whisper days where I wasn't gonna talk louder than this that day, and my students then weren't allowed to talk louder than this, or they would just naturally meet me down here, and it would reset the tone for the entire year, or the rest of the year, or however long, and then eventually we need another reset. So being super intentional with your voice and how you use it can really help you get your students to learn, like engage, and you don't necessarily have to raise your voice. I rarely raise my voice. If anything, I tend to get quieter because it works better for me. I will raise my voice when needed, but more than often than not, I lower and I whisper. So that wraps up everything in regards to whether or not good teachers have to yell. So overall, in my opinion, you don't have to yell to be a good teacher. Not saying it's wrong if you do, it's just not aligned with me. And I don't feel like that's the only way you have to teach. I talked about my story when it came to yelling and how I tried it and it just didn't really work for me. And then we talked about clear expectations, different strategies you can use to get your students to follow and listen to you without yelling. We talked about clear expectations, modeling and teaching those expectations instead of just telling. We talked about consistent consequences, not giving your students 20, 30 warnings before you follow through, but picking things that are aligned with who you are as a teacher and your classroom management style. Make sure to check out more content from my channel, wherever you're tuning in from on that, especially in the next couple weeks. We're talking a lot about classroom management styles, but picking consequences that are aligned with your classroom management style and leaning into that and doing one after another instead of 20 or 30 warnings. The next thing is to have an intentional voice level. Feel free to play around. If your kids are loud, bring your voice level down and see if that helps. So that wraps up everything in regards to that topic or classroom management or this week's content. I have some next steps for you. If you want more tips on classroom management, the first thing, wherever you're tuning in from, I would really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, leave a comment or review. That way content like this can reach more new and first year teachers who are looking for good classroom management strategies. Second, if you want more resources, check out wherever you're tuning in from, because I have over 20 different weeks of content specifically on classroom management, so make sure to check that out. Third thing, if you want me to compile my playlist of classroom management, make sure to check out my free classroom management guide. I took the most 10 commonly asked questions I get when I coach teachers on classroom management. I answered them in a YouTube and a podcast video. YouTube video and a podcast episode, and I answered each one in the guide and then I linked to them. So you're not having to sift through my 3 years of content now. You can just go and you can click on it and listen to what I have to say. If you want a more in-depth answer, then I provide it in the guide, and it's all wrapped up in one space to save you time. If you wanted to get a step further and you want me to either inspire you with kind of some ideas on what this could look like in your classroom, or you want the exact templates and plug and play stuff I use in my classroom, make sure to check out my classroom management bundle. This is my bundle with everything I use in classroom management for my classroom and many of the teachers that are clients of mine that I've been coaching, what they use in their classroom, everything from classroom procedure slides, student jobs, super improver walls, glow notes, etc. If you want me to show you more of the strategy behind it, you want me to mentor you and guide you, then I definitely recommend you check out the Present Teacher Circle. I am a very strategic teacher. I like using systems in my classroom to automate my classroom. So the Present Teacher Circle is where I show you everything from how to automate our classroom management to prevent disruptive behavior, all the way to how to plan and prep several weeks in advance. I show you my entire automated system. And so if you want to start really strong in classroom management and then you want to kind of have a choose your own adventure and go through different phases, I highly recommend you check that out. We talk about everything from classroom management to how to have positive communication with friends, families, coworkers, staff, and families, everything to how to collect data and grading, how to plan and prep several weeks in advance, and how to organize everything. So if that's what you're looking for, I definitely recommend you check that out. All right, that wraps it all up. As always, thank you so much for joining me. As always, remember, we are stronger together, and I'll see you in the next one, Teacher Bestie. Bye.